What's up, guys? I'm DK, and you're watching Pro Wrestling What If, the series where I look at the different what if scenarios as terms of the world that we call professional wrestling. The Ultimate Warrior was one of the biggest WWE superstars between the late 1980s and the early 1990s. He would hold the Intercontinental Championship on two separate occasions, including on his second reign, he would also capture the WWE Championship from Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. After winning the WWE Championship, he would have feuds with the likes of Ravishing Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect, and even Sergeant Slaughter, who he had dropped the championship to at Royal Rumble in 1991. He would then have a career versus career match against the Macho King Randy Savage, in which he would successfully win, and then was in a feud with The Undertaker, which would result in him getting help from Jake the Snake Roberts, but then ultimately him turning his back on Warrior. However, in July of 1991, Ultimate Warrior would send a letter to Vince McMahon stating that he would want equal pay as Hulk Hogan, along with a couple of different demands, or else he would plan to no-show the upcoming SummerSlam event, an event that would have Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan face off against Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel Mustafa, and General Adnan, known as the Triangle of Terror, in a 3-on-2 handicap match, in which Vince McMahon would temporarily accept the terms until after the match at SummerSlam, which then would lead to McMahon firing the Ultimate Warrior from the WWE. Later, it was stated that it was actually a suspension, but then Ultimate Warrior would end up quitting. However, Ultimate Warrior would return to WWE at WrestleMania 8 as he would save Hulk Hogan from an attack from Papa Shango and Sid Justice. And a lot of people have been wondering what exactly would have happened had Ultimate Warrior not asked for those demands and stayed in WWE throughout that time. So that is going to be the topic of today's episode. It's what if Ultimate Warrior didn't leave WWE in 1991? And if you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share this to all your friends, subscribe, and press the notification bell for when future episodes get released, and leave a comment down below about today's topic or suggesting a future topic for an episode of Pro Wrestling What If. And we're going to track what exactly would have happened with Ultimate Warrior throughout the entire 1 year span from SummerSlam 91 all the way until SummerSlam 1992, in which the next pay-per-view after SummerSlam was of course Survivor Series in 1991. Now, it was discussed on many different platforms, including an episode of Dark Side of the Ring involving Ultimate Warrior, that Jake the Snake Roberts had mentioned that he was set to have a big feud with the Ultimate Warrior following SummerSlam, especially involving the angle where Jake Roberts had sabotaged the Macho Man and Ms. Elizabeth's wedding with the Cobra. So I believe in the position that we seen Randy Savage and Jake Roberts feud in the real timeline was meant to happen for Ultimate Warrior and Jake Roberts instead. And so I believe when it came to Survivor Series 1991 that most likely Jake Roberts and Ultimate Warrior would face each other, but because this is Survivor Series back in the golden era, pretty much every single match besides one was a Survivor Series tag team match. So you would have Jake Roberts with like 3 or 4 people against the Ultimate Warrior with 3 or 4 people, and they would face off in this traditional Survivor Series match. But I still think in this timeline that The Undertaker would have his match with Hulk Hogan and defeat him for the WWE Championship. The next pay-per-view was less than a week later at This Tuesday in Texas, which in the real timeline we did see the Macho Man Randy Savage have his match with Jake the Snake Roberts, which I think it would have been the Ultimate Warrior feuding with Jake Roberts and would conclude their feud, which of course this would most likely mean that just like Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior would defeat Jake the Snake Roberts in this match. Now, Jake Roberts had mentioned in that Dark Side of the Ring interview that this feud was going to lead to Jake Roberts actually having a run as the WWE Champion. However, I feel like that could have been a plan, but was scrapped the moment that they managed to sign the Nature Boy Ric Flair just before SummerSlam. And as terms to the WWE Championship picture, we would still see the same match with Hulk Hogan and The Undertaker that would result in Hulk Hogan actually regaining back the WWE Championship. Next up is the Royal Rumble in 1992. Leading up to this event, we probably still have the same situation as we did in the real timeline, with which would result in the WWE Championship becoming vacant and being a part of the Royal Rumble match. So of course we would see the likes of the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Jake Roberts, Randy Savage, and of course the Ultimate Warrior would most likely be a part of this match. And most likely I could see the Ultimate Warrior actually being in the Final Four portion of the Royal Rumble instead of maybe Macho Man Randy Savage, since I believe around this time was when Randy Savage was originally scheduled to start his feud with Jake the Snake Roberts instead of earlier because of Ultimate Warrior's firing. And I still believe in this timeline, just like the real timeline, Ric Flair would have a tear in his eye and he would win the WWE Championship, last eliminating Sid Justice. Because after all, it probably was the plan since the moment that Ric Flair signed with the WWE that they were planting the seeds for Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan in the main event of WrestleMania 8. Speaking of, the next pay-per-view we're at is of course WrestleMania 8, a pay-per-view event that had so much planned ahead of time but had changed last minute as we build towards the event. Now of course, because Warrior didn't get fired in 91 in this case, he would have an actual match at WrestleMania 8 instead of just doing a run-in at the end of the main event. But the question is, who does the Ultimate Warrior actually face in this case? Because I think this definitely would change a few of the matches. And I guess it also once again depends on whether they stick with Hogan versus Flair at WrestleMania or scrap it like the real timeline. And so I feel there are definitely two opponents in mind that I could see the Ultimate Warrior actually having a match with at WrestleMania 8. I think that the first option would of course be The Undertaker. Even though that the Ultimate Warrior and The Undertaker had feuded in the summer of 91, I think that he could have reverted back to The Undertaker once Ultimate Warrior would have finished his feud with Jake the Snake Roberts. Especially if the case was that they scrapped the Hogan versus Flair match, they would still be able to have Ric Flair versus Macho Man Randy Savage. Sid Justice would still face Hulk Hogan, but then that leaves Jake Roberts out of the picture because Undertaker ended up wrestling Jake Roberts in the real timeline, which I feel that Jake Roberts most likely either would have had some sort of other match with a different opponent or he wouldn't have been on the card at all, since Jake Roberts did leave the WWE right after WrestleMania 8. But unfortunately with this match, this most likely would mean that the Ultimate Warrior would defeat the Undertaker and Undertaker would never have the 21-0 undefeated streak at WrestleMania. And then option number two, and a very likely option for that matter, is to have a match against Sid Justice. Especially because in the real timeline with Warrior helping out Hogan, he did have a feud with Sid Justice following WrestleMania 8 with a bunch of house show loops before Sid Justice would ultimately leave the WWE. So I feel like they could have had a big match between the two where it's basically big man versus big man, and especially with Sid Justice and his height, he could look very opposing to the Ultimate Warrior to where it may give some doubt on whether Ultimate Warrior could beat Sid Justice or not. And this is a match where I could see possibly being for the WWE Championship. And I'm saying this because of a scenario to where maybe they do decide to have Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan in a match, but take the WWE Championship out of the equation. And that is mostly because around this time, it was the beginning of the steroid trial, in which a scenario where they could keep that Hogan Flair match but keep the WWE Championship out of the picture is to have Ric Flair drop it to most likely the Ultimate Warrior and have Ultimate Warrior defend the championship against Sid Justice, especially Sid Justice going on record and saying that he was supposedly promised to be in the main event picture when getting signed in 91, so this would lead to that supposed promise of Sid Justice being in the main event picture, fighting for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 8, but of course this would lead to the Ultimate Warrior in this timeline actually retaining the WWE Championship. And it wouldn't matter if it's the main event or not anyways, because most likely anything related to Hulk Hogan around this time would be the main event. So most likely Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, if it were to happen, would have still been the main event even without the WWE Championship. Then the last pay-per-view we're talking about about is SummerSlam 1992, which I still think we would get the Ultimate Warrior versus Randy Savage for the WWE Championship. But there could be a possibility that in this part of the timeline that maybe Ric Flair does get his rematch for the WWE Championship. Maybe it's a triple threat match, or possibly Ultimate Warrior faces Ric Flair at SummerSlam instead of Randy Savage. But ultimately, if it's one-on-one between Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage, then most likely we are getting that countout finish as we did in the real timeline. And I will say it right now is that after SummerSlam, we most likely still would have the Ultimate Warrior fired in 1992, mainly because Ultimate Warrior always had a big ego, but of course at the same time, Ultimate Warrior was now having his name involved in the steroid trial, which would ultimately end up having him leave in 1992 anyways.